The room was cloaked in a soft, somber glow, the faint scent of antiseptic mingling with the delicate fragrance of lilies resting on the bedside table. Henry Grayson, once a man brimming with life and laughter, now lay motionless in his hospital bed, his breaths shallow and uneven. At 73, the weight of a lifetime of hard work, love, and quiet sacrifices had finally caught up with him, bringing him to the final chapter of his life. Yet, amidst the heavy silence, one presence remained steadfast. Cooper, Henry's loyal golden retriever, lay curled at the foot of the bed, his amber eyes glistening with a sorrow so profound it seemed almost human. At 12 years old, Cooper had been Henry's constant companion, sharing quiet mornings on the porch and the lonely nights that sometimes haunted the aging man. But today, Cooper's usual warmth and vitality were replaced by an unsettling unease. The nurses whispered among themselves, their voices tinged with awe and sadness. "He hasn't left the room for 3 days," one murmured. Another added, "He even skips his meals. It's like he knows." Their voices trailed off, hesitant to finish the thought. Henry's daughter, Clara, sat by the bedside, her fingers lightly brushing her father's frail hand. She glanced at Cooper, her heart swelling with gratitude and curiosity. "He's always been like this," she whispered to a nurse, "but lately, it feels like he's trying to tell us something." The room was silent except for the faint beeping of the heart monitor and the occasional shuffle of footsteps outside. Clara's mind drifted to the countless memories Cooper and her father had shared, how the dog would nudge Henry's hand for treats or sit patiently by his feet during evening prayers. And now, as Henry drifted closer to the end, Cooper seemed more determined than ever to stay by his side. What no one could have known was the secret Cooper carried, a truth he couldn't articulate, but that fueled his unwavering loyalty. As the minutes ticked by and the room grew quieter, the story of their bond and the heart-wrenching revelation it would bring was about to unfold. The quiet hum of the hospital room was interrupted only by the rhythmic beeping of the machines. Clara, unable to shake the urgency in Cooper's behavior, leaned forward and gently stroked the dog's head. His fur, now streaked with silver, was warm under her touch, but his eyes betrayed a deep restlessness. It was as if Cooper carried a message, one that weighed heavily on his loyal heart. Cooper's devotion to Henry had always been extraordinary. From the day Henry brought him home as a playful puppy, their bond had been unshakable. When Henry retired from his job as a schoolteacher, it was Cooper who brought new joy and purpose into his life. Together, they created routines, morning walks through the park, afternoons reading on the porch, and quiet evenings by the fireplace. Henry often joked, "Cooper knows me better than anyone, even you, Clara." But the past year had been different. Henry had begun to slow down, his health deteriorating faster than anyone expected. What started as fatigue soon turned into unexplained weight loss and persistent coughing. Cooper seemed to sense it before anyone else, often refusing to leave. Henry sighed. At first, Clara thought it was just the dog's natural loyalty. But now, watching him curled protectively on the hospital floor, she felt there was something deeper at play. "Dad," Clara said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Do you see how Cooper hasn't left you? He's always been like this, hasn't he?" Henry's eyes fluttered open, his gaze weak but filled with warmth as he looked at his daughter. "He's a good boy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Always has been. But there's something about today, Clara, I think he knows." Clara's chest tightened at her father's words. Knows what, Dad? She asked, leaning closer. But Henry didn't answer. His eyes drifted shut again, his energy too faint to continue. Clara glanced down at Cooper, whose gaze remained fixed on Henry, his body tense as though he were on guard duty. She couldn't shake the feeling that the dog was trying to tell her something. Later that afternoon, the doctor entered, his expression kind but professional. "Clara, can I have a word with you?" he asked, motioning for her to step outside. Reluctantly, she followed, casting a worried glance back at her father and Cooper. In the hallway, the doctor explained that Henry's condition was worsening. "He may only have a few days left," he said gently. "We'll do everything we can to keep him comfortable, but it's important to prepare yourselves." Clara nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you, doctor," she managed, her voice strained. As she turned to go back inside, she paused, suddenly overcome by a thought. "Can you tell me, or do you think Cooper being here is helping him?" she asked, her voice almost pleading. The doctor smiled faintly. "Animals have a way of providing comfort that even medicine can't explain. If Cooper's presence gives your father peace, then I'd say it's more than helping." Returning to the room, Clara found Cooper still at his post. She knelt beside him, her fingers running through his fur. "You're amazing, you know that," she whispered. Cooper looked up at her, his amber eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name and emotion too profound for words. As night fell, the hospital room grew quiet. Clara had insisted on staying overnight, pulling a chair close to Henry's bed. Cooper remained vigilant, barely shifting from his spot, his ears twitching at every sound. At one point, Clara dozed off, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. It was a soft whine from Cooper that woke her. The dog had risen to his feet, his body trembling slightly. He placed his head gently on Henry's arm, letting out another low, mournful sound. Clara's heart clenched at the sight. She reached out to stroke his back, murmuring, "It's okay, boy. I'm here too." But as she touched him, something peculiar happened. Cooper nudged a small leather pouch that had been lying on the bedside table. The motion was deliberate, as though he wanted her to notice it. Clara frowned, picking up the pouch. "What is this, Dad?" she whispered, though she knew her father was too weak to answer. Opening the pouch, she found a collection of old photographs. Of them, of Henry and Cooper during their adventures together. One picture, however, caught her attention. It was of Henry holding Cooper as a puppy, his expression filled with an emotion that went beyond mere affection. On the back of the photograph, in Henry's neat handwriting, were the words, "Forever. My guardian, my gift." Clara's hands shook as she read the words. "Guardian," she murmured aloud. She looked at Cooper, who was watching her intently, his eyes never leaving hers. It was as if he was waiting for her to understand something. What could her father mean by calling Cooper a guardian? And why did the dog seem so desperate to stay with him now? At this moment, as the hours ticked by, Clara found herself unable to let go of the strange sense of urgency. There was something unspoken, a truth lingering in the air, waiting to be uncovered. Cooper's unwavering presence felt like a key, but to what? She didn't yet know. The dim glow of the hospital lights cast long shadows across the room. Clara sat in the chair by Henry's bedside, the small leather pouch still in her hands. She studied the photographs carefully, flipping through them one by one. Each image told a story: afternoons at the lake, hiking through golden autumn forests, lazy evenings by the fireplace. But the last photo was different. It wasn't of Henry and Cooper. Instead, It showed a young Henry standing next to a golden retriever, its fur a striking match to Cooper. The dog had the same intense gaze, the same alert posture. On the back, the name Ranger was scrawled in faded ink. "Ranger," Clara whispered, confused. She looked down at Cooper, who was once again lying by Henry's side, his nose resting against the man's frail arm. The resemblance between Cooper and the dog in the photo was uncanny, almost eerie. Was it possible? No, it couldn't be. Ranger must have been Henry's childhood dog. But then why had her father kept this photograph hidden away? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement from Henry. His eyes fluttered open, and he turned his head weakly toward her. "Clara," he croaked, his voice barely audible. "Dad, I'm here," she said quickly, leaning closer. "What is it?" Henry's gaze shifted to Cooper, a faint smile forming on his lips. He came back," he whispered, his words barely a breath. Clara frowned, confused. "What do you mean, Dad? Who came back?" Henry's hand trembled as he reached for the photograph. In her hands, "Ranger," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I never thought, but he came back as Cooper. He's always been my guardian." Clara's heart raced as her father's words sank in. "Dad, you're not making sense. Cooper is ... He's just a dog." But Henry shook his head weakly. "Not just a dog," he insisted. "He's been with me before. He's here for a reason." Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. Could her father truly believe that Cooper was the reincarnation of his childhood dog? The idea seemed impossible, fantastical even. And yet, as she looked at Cooper, she couldn't deny that the dog's behavior, his devotion, his uncanny timing was unlike anything she'd ever seen before. Henry's eyes drifted shut again, his energy fading. "Take care of him," he murmured. "He'll take care of you." Clara sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. She glanced at Cooper, who had lifted his head slightly, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. It was as if he understood every word Henry had said. The following morning, Clara decided to dig deeper. She left the hospital briefly to visit her father's house, hoping to find some answers among his belongings. The house, filled with memories of her childhood, felt eerily silent. In Henry's study, she found a stack of old journals tucked away in a drawer. She flipped through them, searching for any mention of Ranger or Cooper. One entry caught her attention, dated nearly a year before Cooper came into Henry's life. It read, March 14th, 2009. "I dreamt of Ranger again last night. It's been decades since he passed, but the dream felt so real. He was standing by my side, just as he always did. I woke up with this strange feeling, as if he's not truly gone. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, but it's comforting to believe he's still looking out for me." Clara's breath caught as she read the words. Her father had dreamed of Ranger. Before he adopted Cooper. Could it be possible that he had somehow known Cooper would come into his life? She continued searching, finding more entries that hinted at Henry's deep bond with Ranger and his belief in the dog's spiritual connection to him. One journal entry from the day Henry brought Cooper home stood out. November 2nd, 2010. "When I saw him at the shelter, I knew. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like looking into Ranger's eyes all over again. I didn't choose him, he chose me. I can't shake the feeling that he's here for a reason." Clara closed the journal, her hands trembling. The idea seemed absurd, and yet the evidence was there. Her father had believed that Cooper was more than just a dog. He believed Cooper was a part of something greater, a guardian sent to guide and protect him. Returning to the hospital, Clara found Cooper still at his post, his head resting against Henry's hand. She knelt beside him, her heart heavy with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. "Cooper," she whispered, her voice trembling, "are you really Ranger?" The dog lifted his head, meeting her gaze with an expression so profound it made her chest tighten. He leaned forward, resting his head against her shoulder, and for a moment, Clara felt an overwhelming sense of connection, one that defied explanation. As the day wore on, Henry grew weaker. But his final words to Clara that evening were clear and filled with conviction. "He's your guardian now." The quiet hum of the hospital monitors filled the room as Henry drifted in and out of consciousness. Clara sat at his bedside, her thoughts a tangled mess. The idea that Cooper could be more than just a loyal companion gnawed at her. Her father's words lingered. "He's your guardian now." Cooper remained steadfast, his head resting lightly on Henry's frail hand. He had barely moved since their arrival, except to reposition himself when Henry stirred. There was something undeniably unique about the dog's presence, calming aura that seemed to fill the room, warding off the despair that threatened to overwhelm Clara. As dusk settled, a nurse entered the room, checking Henry's vitals. She paused, glancing at Cooper with a gentle smile. "He hasn't left your father's side, has he?" Clara shook her head. "Not once. It's like he knows." The nurse nodded thoughtfully. "Animals have a way of sensing things. They often know when someone is near the end. It's their way of comforting us." Clara hesitated, then decided to share her father's belief. "My dad. He thinks Cooper is connected to his old dog, Ranger. That somehow he came back to watch over him." The nurse's expression softened. "I've seen stranger things. The bond between a person and their pet is special, sometimes even unexplainable. Maybe your father isn't wrong." After the nurse left, Clara turned to Cooper. She knelt beside him, her fingers gently brushing through his fur. "What are you trying to tell us, boy?" she murmured. "Are you really here for him, for me?" Cooper's amber eyes met hers, and in that moment, Clara felt a wave of emotion crash over her. It was as if the dog could see straight into her soul, understanding every doubt and fear she harbored. He nuzzled her hand, his warmth grounding her amidst the uncertainty that night. Clara couldn't bring herself to leave. She curled up in the chair by Henry's bed, drifting into a restless sleep. In her dreams, she saw Ranger not as the dog in the photograph, but as a golden silhouette standing in a sunlit meadow. Beside him stood Cooper, their forms blending into one, as if they were the same soul in different lifetimes. A sense of peace washed over her, followed by a whisper that seemed to echo in her mind. "Trust him." Clara awoke with a start, her heart pounding. The room was quiet, except for the soft breathing of Henry and the steady presence of Cooper. She looked at the dog, her dream still vivid in her mind. "Ranger," she whispered, testing the name. Cooper perked up slightly, his ears twitching as if acknowledging her words. The following day, Henry's condition worsened. The doctor gently explained that it was time to make him as comfortable as possible. Clara nodded, her chest tightening. She sat by her father, holding his hand, while Cooper remained at his side a silent sentinel. As the hours passed, family and friends came to say their goodbyes. Some were startled to see the dog's unwavering vigil, but none questioned it. "He's part of the family," Clara explained more than once. Later that evening, as the room emptied, Henry stirred weakly. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they were clear and filled with an unusual brightness. He looked at Clara, then at Cooper, and a faint smile crossed his lips. "Clara," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "remember, he's yours now. Take care of him, and he'll take care of you." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "I promise, Dad." Henry's gaze shifted to Cooper, his hand trembling as he reached to touch the dog's head. "Thank you for everything," he whispered. Cooper leaned into the touch, his tail wagging softly. It was a gesture filled with gratitude, as if he, too, understood the weight of the moment. As the night deepened, Henry took his final breath. The room fell silent, the air heavy with loss. Clara buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. Cooper stayed by her side, his head resting on her lap, offering the silent comfort only he could provide. The days that followed were a blur. Clara found herself leaning on Cooper more than she ever thought possible. The dog was a constant source of strength, his presence a reminder of her father's final words. One afternoon, while sorting through her father's belongings, Clara came across a box labeled Ranger Memories. Inside were collars, toys, and a scrapbook filled with photos and notes about her father's life with his first dog. Each page told a story of their adventures, their bond, and the unconditional love they shared. At the very back of the scrapbook, Clara found a handwritten note from her father. "If Ranger ever finds his way back to me, I'll know I've done something right in this life. And if he stays to watch over Clara when I'm gone, then I'll know she's in good hands." Clara clutched the note to her chest, her tears falling freely. She looked at Cooper, who was lying by her feet, his eyes watching her with quiet understanding. "You've been with us all along, haven't you?" she whispered. Cooper wagged his tail, and in that moment, Clara felt a flicker of hope. Her father may have been gone, but his legacy and his guardian remained. The days following Henry's passing were heavy with grief, but life slowly began to move forward. Clara took comfort in Cooper's unwavering presence. The dog had become her anchor, his quiet companionship a constant reminder of her father's love and the strange, almost supernatural connection that seemed to bind them all. However, questions lingered in Clara's mind. The note she found in her father's scrapbook was both comforting and unsettling. How could Henry have known? Could there really be something extraordinary about Cooper? One afternoon, as Clara was cleaning out the attic, she came across an old trunk that had belonged to her grandmother. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, clearly untouched for years. Inside, she discovered a collection of journals, their leather covers cracked and worn with age. Curious, she flipped through them and found entries about Ranger, her grandmother's. Handwriting revealed that Ranger wasn't just a family pet. He had been her father's constant companion through some of the most challenging times of his life. Losing his own father, struggling through college, and finding his footing as a young adult. But there was one entry that caught Clara's attention. Ranger had an uncanny sense about people. He could sense danger before it happened, offer comfort without being called, and protect without hesitation. Some might call it instinct, but I always believed there was something more. Maybe he was more than just a dog. Maybe he was a guardian. The word guardian sent a chill down Clara's spine. It echoed her father's final words and the nurse's observation about animals having an innate ability to sense things humans couldn't. She looked down at Cooper, who had followed her into the attic and was now lying at her feet. "What are you, boy?" she asked softly. Cooper's tail wagged, but his amber eyes seemed to hold a knowing glint, as if he understood the weight of her Question: later that week, Clara decided to visit the veterinary clinic where her father had first adopted Cooper. She wanted answers, even if she wasn't entirely sure what questions to ask. The clinic was small and cozy, with a friendly receptionist who remembered Cooper immediately. Ah, yes, Cooper. Henry came in almost every month to check on him. He loved this dog-like family, the receptionist said with a warm smile. Clara hesitated before speaking. Do you remember anything unusual about when my dad adopted him? The receptionist furrowed her brow in thought. I wasn't working here then. But Dr. Evelyn Parker was. She might remember. Let me get her for you. A few moments later, an older woman with kind eyes and a white coat stepped into the lobby. Clara, it's so nice to see you, Dr. Parker said. I'm sorry about your father. He was a wonderful man. Thank you, Clara replied. I wanted to ask about Cooper. Is there anything you can tell me about when my dad adopted him? Dr. Parker's expression softened. I do remember that day. Cooper was a stray when he was brought in and scared, but incredibly gentle. He bonded with your dad almost instantly, as if he'd been waiting for him. Waiting for him. Clara echoed. Yes, Dr. Parker said, nodding. I remember joking with your dad about it, saying that Cooper must have known he'd come for him. It was remarkable, really. Most strays are wary of strangers, but Cooper walked right up to your dad and leaned against him, as if they were already old friends. Clara felt a lump rise in her throat. Do you think it's possible he knew my dad somehow? Like, maybe they'd crossed paths before? Dr. Parker hesitated, then said, I've seen a lot in my years as a vet. Animals have ways of connecting with people that we don't fully understand. I can't explain it, but Cooper and your father had a bond that was undeniable. That evening, Clara sat on her couch, the journals, her father's scrapbook, and Dr. Parker's words swirling in her mind. Cooper lay beside her, his head resting on her lap. Maybe you are more than just a dog, she said aloud. But why? Why are you here, and why now? Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from an old family friend, Mrs. Hargrove, who had known her father since childhood. Clara, I've been thinking about Henry and Ranger. If you're free, I'd love to share some stories with you. Clara replied quickly, setting up a time to visit. She had a feeling Mrs. Hargrove might have answers to the questions that were beginning to consume her. When Clara arrived at Mrs. Hargrove's house the next day, the elderly woman greeted her warmly. Come in, dear. I've been meaning to talk to you ever since the funeral. Clara sat down, and Mrs. Hargrove wasted no time diving into her memories. Henry and Ranger had a bond like no other. That dog was more than a pet, he was his protector. There was this one time, when Henry was about your age, that Ranger saved him from a terrible accident. It was almost as if he knew what was going to happen before it did. What kind of accident? Clara asked, her curiosity piqued. Mrs. Hargrove leaned in, her voice lowering. Henry was working late one night, and Ranger wouldn't stop barking. He dragged him out of the house, and moments later, the roof collapsed. If Ranger hadn't acted, Henry wouldn't have survived. Clara sat back, her mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they painted was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Could it be that Cooper was here, not just for her father, but for her as well? If so, what was he protecting her from? The more Clara unraveled about her father, Ranger, and now Cooper, the deeper her emotional turmoil became. Was this merely coincidence, or was there something truly extraordinary at play? She couldn't shake the feeling that Cooper's arrival into their lives, coupled with her father's final words, was no accident. One evening, as the sun set and the house was bathed in a golden glow, Clara sat on the porch with Cooper by her side. The weight of her discoveries pressed heavily on her chest. She stared at the horizon, lost in thought, when her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. How are you holding up? Clara hesitated before responding. She loved Daniel dearly, but how could she explain everything she had uncovered? It sounded absurd, even to her. Instead, she replied with a simple, "I'm okay, just a lot on my mind." Moments later, the phone rang. "Clara," Daniel's voice was soft and understanding. "I know you're not okay. Please, talk to me." Tears welled in her eyes as she finally broke down. "Daniel, it's Cooper. He's not just a dog. There's something more. I don't know how to explain it, but I think he's protecting me. From what, I don't know." Daniel was silent for a moment, then asked gently, "What makes you think that?" Clara recounted everything: her father's scrapbook, the journals, Dr. Parker's words, and Mrs. Hargrove's story. By the end, her voice was trembling. "I sound crazy, don't I?" Daniel's reply surprised her. "No, you don't, Clara. Animals have a way of sensing things we can't. I've read stories about dogs detecting illnesses, warning about disasters. Maybe Cooper is here for a reason. But the question is, what do you want to do about it?" Clara glanced down at Cooper, who was watching her intently, as if understanding every word. "I want answers," she whispered. "I need to know why he's here." The following morning, Clara decided to act. If Cooper truly had some connection to her father, perhaps revisiting the places they shared would yield more clues. She packed a bag, grabbed Cooper's leash, and set out to her father's favorite hiking trailer secluded path winding through the woods that Henry often visited for peace and reflection. As they walked, the memories came flooding back. She could almost see her father ahead of her, his steady stride and warm smile lighting up the path. Cooper trotted alongside her, his demeanor unusually alert. Every so often, he would stop, sniff the air, and glance back at Clara, as if checking to ensure she was okay. Halfway through the trail, Cooper suddenly froze, his ears perked, and let out a low growl. Clara's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Cooper turned sharply, pulling on the leash, leading Clara off the path and into the dense woods. Her pulse quickened as branches snapped underfoot. "Cooper, slow down," she called, struggling to keep up. Finally, they reached a small clearing. In the center was an old oak tree, its massive trunk gnarled and weathered with age. Clara recognized it immediately. It was the spot where her father often brought her as a child, a place he called his sanctuary. Cooper sat at the base of the tree, his tail wagging gently. He pawed at the ground, whining softly, as if urging her to look closer. Clara knelt and began to clear away the leaves and dirt. To her astonishment, she uncovered a small wooden box, weathered but intact. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a collection of items: a photograph of her father with Ranger, a handwritten letter, and a tarnished locket. She unfolded the letter, her breath catching as she recognized her father's handwriting. "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means Cooper has brought you here. I don't know how to explain it, but our family has always had a bond with these extraordinary dogs. Ranger saved my life countless times, and now Cooper is here for you. Trust him. He will guide you when you need it most, just as Ranger guided me." Love always, Dad. Clara clutched the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Cooper, who was now sitting quietly, his amber eyes filled with what could only be described as understanding. "You really are more than just a dog," she whispered. On the way back home, Clara's mind raced. The letter confirmed what she had suspected, but it also raised new questions. What did her father mean by guiding her when she needed it most? What could Cooper possibly know about her future that she didn't? As they arrived home, Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just going to let this mystery linger. She would dig deeper, uncover every secret her father had kept, and finally understand the truth about Cooper's role in her life. But even as she resolved to push forward, a flicker of fear crept into her heart. If Cooper was here to protect her, what exactly was he protecting her from? The days after discovering her father's letter at the oak tree were filled with a mix of hope and unease for Clara. Cooper's presence, once a simple comfort, now carried an undeniable weight. Each time his ears twitched, or he looked intently at a seemingly empty corner of the room, she couldn't help but wonder what was he sensing. Clara decided to focus on her father's belongings again, hoping they might reveal more about the bond between Ranger and him. She spent hours poring over photo albums, journals, and memorabilia stored in the attic. Among the items, she found another peculiar object, rusted compass tucked inside a velvet pouch with the initials HG engraved on the back. The compass didn't seem remarkable at first, but as Clara examined it closely, she noticed a faint inscription along its edge. Squinting to read the faded words, she deciphered, "Always find your way home." That night, Clara placed the compass on her nightstand and lay in bed, restless. Cooper curled up on the floor beside her, as usual, but his ears perked up and his gaze remained fixed on the window. "What is it, boy?" Clara asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Cooper didn't respond in his usual way with a wag of his tail or a reassuring glance. Instead, he stood up, padded to the window, and let out a low growl. Clara sat up, her heart pounding. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it outside into the darkness. Nothing, just the swaying trees and the faint glow of the streetlight. "You're just spooked, Cooper," Clara said, though she wasn't entirely sure if she was trying to reassure him or herself. She closed the blinds and returned to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, Clara decided to share what she had found with Daniel. She invited him over, along with Mrs. Hargrove, hoping that their perspectives might shed light on the growing mystery. "I found this compass in my dad's things," Clara explained as they gathered around the kitchen table. She handed it to Daniel, who turned it over in his hands, his brow furrowing. "The inscription feels like a message, but I don't know what it's pointing to, if it's even pointing to anything." Mrs. Hargrove peered at the compass and gasped. "I remember that compass. Your father carried it everywhere after Ranger passed. He used to say it reminded him that no matter how lost he felt, he could always find his way back." Clara's heart ached at the thought. Back to what? She asked, more to herself than to anyone else. Daniel's expression turned thoughtful. "Do you think it could be a literal message? Like, maybe there's another place you need to find?" "That's exactly what I've been wondering," Clara said. "But where do I even start?" Mrs. Hargrove reached out and placed a comforting hand on Clara's. "Sometimes the answers find you, dear. Just like Cooper brought you to that letter. Trust him, later." That day, Clara decided to test the compass, taking Cooper for a walk to the woods where she'd found the letter. She held the compass in her hand, watching as the needle swung erratically before finally settling in one direction. "Let's see where it leads," she murmured to Cooper, who wagged his tail as if in agreement. They followed the compass deeper into the forest, the air growing cooler and the trees denser with each step. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being guided, not just by the compass, but by something greater. After nearly an hour of walking, they reached a small clearing she'd never seen before. At its center stood a dilapidated cabin, its wooden walls weathered by time. Cooper barked once sharply, then sprinted ahead, his nose to the ground. "Cooper, wait," Clara called, her voice echoing in the stillness. She approached the cabin cautiously, the compass still clutched in her hand. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a single, dusty room. Inside was sparse a wooden table, an old rocking chair, and a stack of yellowed papers. Cooper was sniffing near the fireplace, his tail wagging furiously. Clara knelt beside him and found a small locked chest hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Her hands trembled as she lifted it out. The chest was ornate, with intricate carvings of leaves and vines, and the initials HG etched onto the lid. "This was my dad's," Clara whispered, her voice catching in her throat. Back home, Clara used a set of old keys she'd found among her father's belongings to open the chest. Inside were more photographs, letters, and a small leather-bound journal. The first entry stopped her cold. "If anything happens to me, trust Cooper. He's here for you, Clara, just as Ranger was there for me. Some things can't be explained, only felt. You'll understand when the time comes." The rest of the journal detailed her father's life after Ranger's passing, how he'd struggled with grief, found solace in nature, and eventually adopted Cooper. But there were also entries about strange occurrences, dreams he couldn't explain, feelings of being watched, and moments where Cooper seemed to intervene at just the right time. As Clara closed the journal, a knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Daniel, his expression tense. "Clara, I just got a call from Mrs. Hargrove. She said she remembered something important about your dad and Ranger." Clara's pulse quickened. "What did she say?" Daniel hesitated. "She didn't want to tell me over the phone. She said it was something you needed to hear in person." Cooper barked softly, as if urging them to go. Clara grabbed her coat and the journal, her heart pounding as she prepared to uncover yet another layer of the mystery. Clara and Daniel arrived at Mrs. Hargrove's home, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the quiet neighborhood. Cooper, as usual, stayed close to Clara's side, his movements calm yet deliberate, as if he too sensed the weight of the moment. Mrs. Hargrove greeted them at the door with a nervous smile, her usually warm demeanor tinged with unease, and she ushered them into her living room without delay. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a comforting blend that contrasted sharply with the tension in the air. "Thank you for coming," Mrs. Hargrove began, her hands trembling slightly as she motioned for them to sit. "I've been piecing things together ever since you mentioned the compass and the journal. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have shared years ago." Clara leaned forward, clutching the journal in her lap. "What is it?" Mrs. Hargrove hesitated, her eyes flitting toward Cooper, who had settled at Clara's feet but kept his sharp gaze fixed on her. "It's about Ranger and your father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and why your father was so insistent on keeping you and Cooper close." She began to tell them a story, one that unfolded like a forgotten memory brought back to life years ago when Clara's father first adopted Ranger. He had confided in Mrs. Hargrove about a strange experience he couldn't explain. Ranger had shown an uncanny ability to sense danger, often acting as though he knew what was coming before anyone else did. There was an incident, Mrs. Hargrove said, her voice trembling. Your father was hiking alone in the woods, and Ranger stopped him from crossing a river. The next day, that very spot was washed away in a flood. He said Ranger saved his life. Clara nodded, her heart heavy with the echoes of her father's words in the journal. That sounds like Cooper, she murmured. He always knows when something's wrong, Mrs. Hargrove continued, her gaze distant, as though reliving the past. Your father became convinced that Ranger wasn't just a dog, but something more, a guardian, a protector. And when Ranger passed, he believed that Bond would carry on to the next dog he adopted. Clara glanced at Cooper, who was watching Mrs. Hargrove with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. Do you think that's why my dad chose Cooper? She asked. Mrs. Hargrove hesitated, then nodded. I believe so. He always said he felt a connection with Cooper the moment he saw him, like Ranger had somehow led him to that shelter, to that exact moment. Daniel, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. But why all the secrecy? Why didn't he just tell Clara about this? Because he didn't want to frighten her, Mrs. Hargrove replied. He was worried it would sound unbelievable, but more than that, he didn't fully understand it himself. Clara's mind raced as she processed the revelation. Her father's journal, the compass, the letter by the oak tree, it all pointed to a bond that went beyond what she could comprehend. Yet one question loomed larger than the rest. Why now? She asked, her voice breaking. Why is this all happening now, when my dad is gone? Mrs. Hargrove's expression darkened. I don't know, she admitted. But I do know one thing. Is trying to protect you, just like Ranger protected your father. Whatever is happening, you need to trust him. As they left Mrs. Hargrove's house, the weight of her words lingered in the air. Clara walked ahead, lost in thought, while Daniel stayed back with Cooper, who seemed unusually restless. Do you think it's true? Daniel asked, his voice low. About Cooper being some kind of guardian? Clara paused, glancing back at them. I don't know, she admitted, but I felt it too, the way he always seems to know what I need before I do. It's like he's connected to something I can't see. They reached the car, and Cooper hesitated before jumping in, his ears twitching as though catching a sound they couldn't hear. Clara noticed and frowned. What is it, boy? Cooper let out a low whine, his eyes darting toward the woods in the distance. Clara followed his gaze, but saw nothing unusual. Still, a sense of unease settled over her, as though something unseen was watching them. Back at the house, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Cooper was trying to warn her. She decided to revisit her father's journal, hoping it might hold more clues. Daniel stayed with her, sorting through the photographs and letters they had found in the chest. Here, he said, holding up a photo of her father and Ranger by the oak tree. Look at this. Clara took the photo and examined it closely. Her father was holding the same compass she had found, and Ranger was sitting at his feet, staring directly at the camera with an expression that was almost knowing. Suddenly, Cooper barked, startling them both. He was standing at the door, his tail stiff, his body tense. Clara and Daniel exchanged a worried glance before rushing to see what had caught his attention. The porch light flickered as they stepped outside, and a cold wind swept through the yard. Cooper growled low in his throat, his eyes fixed on the woods. Clara's heart raced as she followed his gaze, seeing nothing but shadows. What's out there? She whispered, her voice trembling. Cooper barked again, then looked up at her with an urgency she couldn't ignore. It was clear whatever was coming, they weren't safe. The night settled heavily over Clara's home, the air thick with an almost tangible unease. Inside, the faint ticking of the clock filled the silence as Clara sat on the living room floor, surrounded by her father's journal, old photographs, and scattered notes. Cooper lay beside her, his head resting on her lap, but his ears twitched at every sound, his body rigid with tension. His behavior had grown increasingly protective, and Clara couldn't ignore the sense that something significant was about to happen. Daniel sat across from her, studying the map they'd found in one of the envelopes. "This place," he said, pointing to a marked location deep within the woods. "Your dad mentioned it in his journal. It's where he said Ranger saved him." Clara traced the lines of the map with her finger. "He wrote about feeling something. There's something he couldn't explain. It was like Ranger was guiding him toward or away from something." Cooper let out a low growl, drawing their attention. He stood abruptly, his gaze fixed on the front door. Clara followed his line of sight, her pulse quickening. "What is it, boy?" The room seemed to hold its breath as Cooper moved toward the door, his movements slow and deliberate. He barked once, sharp and commanding, then looked back at Clara, as if urging her to follow. Clara exchanged a glance with Daniel, who nodded. "Let's see what's going on." Grabbing a flashlight, they stepped out onto the porch. The air was colder than it should have been for the season, and the trees swayed eerily in the windless night. Cooper stood at the edge of the porch, his body taut, every muscle coiled as though ready to spring into action. "What is it, Cooper?" Clara whispered. The dog growled, his eyes fixed on the woods. Clara's gaze followed his, but the darkness concealed whatever had captured his attention. She turned to Daniel. "Do you think we should check it out?" Daniel hesitated, but then nodded. "If Cooper thinks there's something out there, we need to trust him." They grabbed their jackets and followed Cooper as he led them toward the woods, his steps confident and deliberate, as though he knew exactly where he was going. Clara's grip tightened on the flashlight as they ventured deeper into the trees, the beam cutting through the darkness but revealing little. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps on the forest floor. Cooper suddenly stopped, his ears perked, and let out a low growl. Clara froze, her heart pounding. "What is it, boy?" Before Daniel could respond, a rustling sound came from the bushes ahead. Cooper lunged forward, barking furiously, his body blocking Clara as if shielding her from danger. Clara shined the flashlight toward the noise, and for a moment she thought she saw a pair of glowing eyes reflecting back at her. "What was that?" she gasped, gripping Daniel's arm. "I don't know," Daniel said, his voice tense. "But we need to keep moving." Cooper didn't wait for their decision. He began walking again, his growls low but persistent, guiding them further into the woods. The rustling followed them, always just out of sight, heightening their unease. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small clearing. In the center stood an old oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching skyward like twisted fingers. Clara immediately recognized it from the photographs and her father's journal. "This is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is where my dad said Ranger saved him." Cooper circled the base of the tree, his nose to the ground, sniffing furiously. Clara knelt beside him, her hand brushing against something in the dirt. She shined the flashlight down and gasped it was the compass, the same compass her father had mentioned, half buried in the soil, its surface tarnished with age. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. "He must have left it here," Daniel said, crouching beside her, studying the ground. Do you think he was trying to leave us a message? Cooper barked sharply, interrupting their thoughts. He stood, rigid, his gaze fixed on the shadows at the edge of the clearing. Clara followed his line of sight, her stomach twisting with dread as the rustling grew louder, closer. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the trees. It was large and shadowy, its movement slow and deliberate. Clara's flashlight flickered as she pointed it toward the figure, revealing the outline of a wolf. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, and it stood motionless, watching them. "Stay behind me," Daniel said, stepping in front of Clara. Cooper positioned himself between them and the wolf, his body low, teeth bared, growling fiercely. The wolf didn't move, but continued to stare, its presence unsettling and unnatural. Clara's mind raced. This wasn't just a wild animal. There was something otherworldly about it. She clutched the compass tightly, feeling its weight in her hand, as though it were a tether to her father and Ranger. "What do we do?" she whispered. Daniel didn't respond, his focus entirely on the wolf, whose gaze now shifted to Cooper. The two animals seemed locked in a silent standoff, the air crackling with tension. Then, without warning, the wolf let out a low growl and took a step forward. Cooper barked furiously, his entire body vibrating with the intensity of his warning. Clara felt a surge of fear, but also an unshakable sense of trust in Cooper. He wasn't just protecting her, he was facing something far beyond what any ordinary dog could comprehend. The wolf paused, its head tilting, as if considering its next move. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the wolf turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the echo of its growl behind. Cooper relaxed slightly but didn't let his guard down. Clara knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice shaking. Daniel helped her to her feet, his face pale but resolute. "We need to get back. Whatever that was, it's not over." As they turned to leave, Clara glanced back at the oak tree, the compass clutched tightly in her hand. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Trust Cooper. He'll guide you when the time comes." And she knew, with every fiber of her being, that the time had come. Back at the house, the air was charged with an unsettling tension. Clara sat at the dining table, the compass placed carefully in front of her, its worn metal surface catching the light. She could almost imagine her father holding it during his final days. Cooper lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes were fixed on the compass, as if it held answers only he could understand. Daniel paced the room, his face lined with worry. "Clara, that wolf, it wasn't normal. There's something bigger happening here." Clara nodded, her fingers brushing against the compass. "My dad always believed Ranger saved him from something he couldn't explain. Maybe Cooper's trying to do the same for me." The room fell silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock. Outside, the wind howled, and the branches of the old oak tree outside the window tapped against the glass. Cooper perked up, his ears twitching, and let out a low growl. Clara looked at Daniel, her heart pounding. "He senses something." Michael grabbed the flashlight and his coat. "If Cooper thinks there's a reason to check, we need to follow him." The three of them ventured outside into the cold, dark night. Cooper led the way, his steps deliberate and purposeful. The compass hung around Clara's neck, swaying with each step as though it was being drawn to their destination. They reached the clearing where the oak tree stood, its twisted branches casting long shadows in the moonlight. The air felt heavier here, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "What now?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Clara could respond, Cooper barked sharply, startling them both. He began digging at the base of the tree, his powerful paws sending dirt flying. Clara rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. "Cooper, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. Beneath the disturbed soil, something metallic glinted in the moonlight. Clara reached into the hole and pulled out an old, rusted box. It was heavy, its surface covered in dirt and moss. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were a collection of weathered papers, a photograph, and a small notebook. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the photo her father holding Ranger, standing in front of the very oak tree where they now stood. Daniel knelt beside her, shining the flashlight on the notebook. "What is this?" Clara flipped through the pages, her father's handwriting filling each one. The entries were fragmented, but the message was clear. He had been afraid of something. He wrote about strange occurrences, an ever-present feeling of being watched, and Ranger's unwavering determination to protect him. One entry caught Clara's eye. "If anything happens to me, trust Ranger. He knows the truth." Her grip on the notebook tightened as she read the final lines aloud. "There's something in the woods, something ancient. It's not just a wolf. It's something more Ranger has always known." The words hung heavy in the air as the wind picked up, rustling the leaves around them. Cooper growled low and deep, his body rigid. Clara turned to Daniel, fear etched on her face. "He was trying to warn me," she whispered. "All these years, he knew something was out here." Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. And now Cooper's carrying on where Ranger left off. Suddenly, a distant howl pierced the night long and mournful. Clara's heart raced as the sound echoed through the forest. Cooper stood, his body trembling with tension, and let out a sharp bark. "We're not alone," Daniel said, gripping Clara's arm. The howl grew louder, closer, and was joined by others. Clara's mind raced as she tried to piece everything together. "It's not just one wolf," she said, her voice breaking. "It's a pack," Cooper barked again, his stance protective as shadows began to move at the edge of the clearing. Daniel shined the flashlight toward the movement, revealing the glint of yellow eyes staring back at them. There were at least 3 wolves, their forms blending seamlessly with the darkness. Clara clutched the compass tightly, her father's final words echoing in her mind. "Trust Cooper." The lead wolf stepped forward, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity. Cooper growled, baring his teeth, and stepped in front of Clara, his stance unwavering. The air was thick with tension, and Clara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "What do we do?" Daniel asked, his voice barely audible. Clara didn't answer. Instead, she knelt beside Cooper, placing her hand on his back. "We trust him." The lead wolf snarled, its growl reverberating through the clearing. Cooper responded with a bark so fierce it seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. The 2 animals locked eyes, and Clara felt a strange energy ripple through the air, as though the forest itself was alive and watching. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, as if by some unspoken agreement, the wolves retreated into the shadows, their glowing eyes disappearing one by one. Clara let out a shaky breath, her hand still on Cooper's back. "He did it," Daniel said, his voice filled with awe. "He protected us." Cooper turned to Clara, his eyes meeting hers. In that moment, she felt an unbreakable bond between them, one that transcended time and space. Her father's words had been right. Cooper knew the truth, and he had guided her through the danger. As the forest fell silent once more, Clara stood, the compass still clutched in her hand. "This isn't over," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever my father discovered, it's still out there. And Cooper and I are going to find out what it is." Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll do it together." With Cooper leading the way, they began their journey back to the house, knowing that the answers they sought were closer than ever and that the most critical confrontation was yet to come. The walk back to the house was shrouded in a tense silence. Clara's mind raced with questions, her father's words echoing alongside the haunting events of the night. Daniel walked beside her, his flashlight sweeping the darkened forest, while Cooper stayed close, his eyes darting toward every shadow. The unearthed notebook weighed heavily in Clara's hands, its revelations gnawing at her. Ranger had protected her father against an ancient force, and now it seemed that Cooper was continuing that mission. But why? What was the true nature of the danger that lingered in these woods? As they neared the edge of the property, the familiar sight of the house came into view. Yet, instead of relief, a chill ran down Clara's spine. The front door was ajar, swinging lightly in the breeze. Daniel stopped abruptly. "Did you leave the door open?" Clara shook her head. "No, I locked it before we left." Cooper let out a low growl, his fur bristling as he stepped in front of them. Daniel tightened his grip on the flashlight, motioning for Clara to stay back. "Wait here," he whispered, but Clara shook her head firmly. "No, we do this together." They approached the house cautiously, Cooper leading the way. The interior was dark, save for the faint glow of the kitchen light spilling down the hallway. As they stepped inside, the air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the house itself were holding its breath. "Stay close," Daniel murmured, his voice barely audible. Clara nodded, clutching the notebook tightly. Cooper sniffed the air, his movements slow and deliberate. He growled again, his body tense, and led them toward the living room. The compass around Clara's neck began to sway unnaturally, as though drawn by an invisible force. "What's happening?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel held up the flashlight, its beam revealing the living room in disarray. Furniture was overturned, and the shattered remnants of the family photo frames littered the floor. In the center of the room, the compass swung violently, pulling against the chain as if trying to break free. Cooper barked sharply, his gaze fixed on a corner of the room where the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. Clara's breath caught as the air grew colder, her breath visible in the dim light. Suddenly, a deep guttural growl echoed through the room, not from Cooper, but from the shadows themselves. Daniel raised the flashlight, and the beam fell upon a pair of glowing eyes. A massive, spectral wolf emerged, its translucent form shimmering with an eerie light. Its presence was both majestic and terrifying, its gaze locked on Clara. Daniel stepped back instinctively. "What is that?" Clara's hands trembled as she held the notebook tighter. "I think it's what my father was warning about." The spectral wolf snarled, its form rippling as it took a step closer. Cooper barked fiercely, positioning himself between Clara and the creature. Despite the size difference, Cooper held his ground, his growls unwavering. Clara felt a surge of courage as she looked at Cooper. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Trust him. She knelt beside her loyal companion, placing a hand on his back. "We're in this together," she whispered. The compass grew hotter against her chest, its pull almost magnetic. Clara reached for it, unhooking it from her neck. As soon as it left her grasp, It hovered in midair, spinning wildly before pointing directly at the spectral wolf. The creature let out a deafening howl, and the room seemed to tremble. The energy around them intensified, the walls vibrating as if the house itself were reacting to the confrontation. Clara opened the notebook frantically, flipping through the pages. Her father had mentioned something about the compass being more than a keepsake. It was a key, a tool meant to seal whatever force had been threatening their family for generations. "Daniel," she called out, "I think I know what to do." Daniel turned to her, his face pale. "What do you need?" "I need to get the compass into the light," Clara said, her voice firm despite her fear. "It's the only way to banish it." The spectral wolf lunged forward, its jaws snapping, but Cooper intercepted it, leaping into its path. The two collided, a flash of light erupting from the impact. Cooper yelped, but didn't back down, his determination unwavering. Clara ran toward the kitchen, where the light was brightest. The compass followed her, glowing brighter with each step. Daniel grabbed a fallen chair, swinging it at the spectral wolf to buy her more time. Reaching the kitchen, Clara held the compass aloft, its glow illuminating the room. "Come on," she shouted, her voice trembling. "Let's end this." The spectral wolf turned its gaze toward her, its eyes blazing with fury. It charged, but just as it reached the threshold of the kitchen, the compass emitted a blinding light. The creature howled in agony, its form dissolving into wisps of smoke. The house fell silent, the oppressive weight in the air lifted, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. Cooper limped toward Clara, his tail wagging weakly. Clara knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face as she hugged him tightly. "You did it, Cooper. You saved us." Daniel joined them, his hand on Clara's shoulder. "That was incredible. I've never seen anything like it." Clara nodded, her heart still racing. "Neither have I. But I think we finally put my father's fears in, whatever that was, to rest." Together, they stood in the quiet kitchen, the compass now cool in Clara's hand. Though the danger had passed, they knew this was just the beginning of a deeper mystery. And with Cooper by her side, Clara was ready to face whatever came next. The house was quiet now, its shadows no longer shifting with malevolence, but still cloaked in an uneasy silence. Clara sat on the kitchen floor with Cooper curled against her, his breathing heavy but steady. The once threatening compass lay in her palm, its glow faded, leaving only a faint warmth. Daniel knelt beside her, his eyes scanning the room for any lingering danger. "Do you think it's really gone?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded slowly. "I think so," she said, though her voice carried an edge of uncertainty. "The compass, whatever it did, I think it worked. But it's not just about the wolf. There's something more here, something my father never fully explained." Cooper shifted, letting out a low whine as he licked her hand. Clara looked down at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and sorrow. His unwavering courage had saved them, and she could see the toll it had taken on his aging body. His fur was matted, his muscles trembling with exhaustion. "You were so brave," Clara whispered, stroking his head. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Daniel glanced toward the living room, where the damage from the spectral encounter was still evident. "We should clean this up," he said. "But first, I think we need to figure out what all of this means. That compass, it's not just a keepsake." Clara nodded, her fingers brushing over the intricate carvings on the compass. "It belonged to my dad. He always said it was passed down through the family, but I never thought it was anything more than a sentimental heirloom." Now I see it's something much bigger. Daniel leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Do you think your father knew this would happen? That's why he wrote those notes. Clara frowned, flipping through the notebook once more. Her father's meticulous handwriting filled the pages, detailing stories of strange encounters, warnings, and cryptic references to the compass's power. She stopped on one page where he had written, "The compass is the key to protecting the bond." The bond, Clara murmured, her brow furrowing. He always talked about the bond between him and Ranger, his old dog. He said it was unbreakable, that it went beyond what most people could understand. Daniel tilted his head. You think that's what he meant? That this bond is connected to the compass somehow? Clara looked at Cooper, who was now resting his head on her lap. I think it's more than that. Cooper, he's not just a loyal dog. He's a protector, just like Ranger was for my dad. They're part of this bond, this force that keeps whatever that thing was from taking hold. Daniel crouched beside her, his face serious. So Cooper isn't just protecting you because he loves you. He's protecting something bigger. Clara's chest tightened at the thought. But what happens when he can't anymore? He's getting older, Daniel. Tonight took so much out of him. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll figure it out together. And you've got your father's notes to guide you. You're not alone in this. Clara nodded, though the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her. She flipped to the last page of the notebook and found a passage written in bold letters. When the time comes, trust the compass and the bond. It will guide you to the truth. Before she could ponder its meaning further, Cooper suddenly lifted his head, his ears perked. He let out a soft bark, his eyes focused on the doorway leading to the backyard. Clara and Daniel exchanged a glance, and without hesitation, they followed his lead. Stepping outside, the cool night air greeted them, the sky now clear and filled with stars. Cooper limped forward, his nose to the ground, as he led them toward the edge of the woods. Clara's heart raced, unsure of what they might find. What is it, boy? She asked softly, following him. As they reached the edge of the property, Cooper stopped near an old, gnarled tree, its roots stretched out like claws gripping the earth. Cooper sniffed around the base of the tree, then pawed at the ground. Clara crouched beside him, brushing aside leaves and dirt. Her fingers hit something solid, a small, rusted metal box. Daniel knelt to help her pry it open. Inside, they found a folded piece of parchment and an old photograph. The photograph showed her father as a young man, standing proudly with Ranger by his side. The parchment was covered in faded writing, but one line stood out clearly. The bond must continue. When the protector grows weak, the compass will choose the next. Clara's breath hitched as she read the words, the next. What does that mean? Daniel looked at her with a mix of awe and concern. I think it means that Cooper isn't the last. This bond, it's something that goes beyond a single dog or person. It's a legacy. Tears welled in Clara's eyes as she looked at Cooper, who gazed back at her with unwavering trust. So this isn't the end, she said. It's just another chapter. Daniel nodded. And you're part of it now, just like your dad was. As they carried the box back to the house, Clara felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. The mystery was far from solved, but she wasn't afraid. With Cooper by her side and the compass guiding her, she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. The first rays of dawn seeped through the curtains as Clara sat in her armchair, cradling the compass in her hands. Cooper lay at her feet, his breathing slow and steadier, gentle reminder of his unyielding loyalty. The house was calm now, its air lighter, as though the secrets it had harbored were finally beginning to dissipate. Daniel brought her a cup of tea, placing it on the table beside her. "It's been a long night," he said softly, sitting down across from her. "But you did it, Clara. You found the truth." She nodded, her fingers tracing the worn edges of the compass. "Not all of it," she replied. "But I know now that this is just the beginning. My dad, he left this for a reason. He wanted me to understand the bond, to carry it forward." Her gaze fell to Cooper, whose tail gave a faint wag at the sound of her voice. Tears welled in her eyes. "He's been my protector all these years, my constant companion. And now I see how much more he is. He's part of something bigger, something I barely understand." Daniel leaned forward, his voice gentle. "He's not just protecting you, Clara. He's showing you the way. And when the time comes, you'll know what to do." Clara nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. She reached for her father's notebook, flipping through the pages one last time. The final words jumped out at her again. "Trust the bond. It will guide you." Taking a deep breath, she closed the notebook and set it aside. "I'll trust it," she said firmly, "for Cooper, for my dad, and for whatever comes next." As the sun climbed higher, casting its warm glow over the room, Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The challenges were far from over, but she knew she wasn't facing them alone. She knelt beside Cooper, her hands gently stroking his fur. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Cooper let out a soft whine, his eyes meeting hers with a depth of understanding that words couldn't capture. Clara looked up at Daniel, her determination renewed. "We'll figure this out together." Daniel smiled, his confidence in her unwavering. "I know we will." As the day unfolded, Clara began making plans, sorting through her father's notes and organizing the artifacts she had uncovered. She felt ready to take the next steps, no matter how uncertain the path ahead might be. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your own experiences with the incredible bond between humans and animals, or let us know what you think about the mysteries Clara uncovered. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming and inspiring stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for being part of this journey. We can't wait to see you in our next video, where more tales of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals await.